The airport buzzed with the usual chaos, passengers dragging suitcases, flight attendants rushing to their gates, and the constant hum of announcements filling the air. It was just another routine evening at Crestwood International. That is, until a single police dog brought everything to a sudden halt. Officer Jake Reynolds had been working with K9 Max for over 4 years. Trained to detect explosives and narcotics, Max was one of the best in the force. But tonight, something was different. The German Shepherd had been calm all day, carrying out his usual patrols without any sign of distress. That all changed the moment they reached Gate 14. A pilot, dressed sharply in his uniform, walked toward the jet bridge, ready to board his flight. Max suddenly stopped, ears pinned back, tail stiff. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Jake frowned. Max was never wrong. The dog's instincts were razor-sharp, and if he was reacting this way, something was definitely off. "Easy, buddy," Jake murmured, gripping the leash. Max, however, didn't budge. Instead, he lunged forward, barking aggressively. Passengers turned their heads. The pilot froze mid-step. His face remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something Jake couldn't quite place. Fear? Surprise? "Sir, I need you to step aside," Jake said firmly, positioning himself between the pilot and the entrance to the plane. Max barked again, more insistent this time. The pilot hesitated, just for a second. And that second was enough to send Jake's instincts into overdrive. "Now," Jake added, his tone leaving no room for argument. The pilot exhaled sharply, raising his hands. "Is there a problem, officer?" His voice was calm, but his body was rigid. Max wasn't focused on the man anymore. Instead, his nose was pointed downward, sniffing furiously at the ground just beneath the jet bridge. Then, without warning, he started scratching at the floor, barking louder than before. Jake's heart pounded. He reached for his radio. "I need backup at Gate 14. Possible threat." A few passengers gasped. The tension in the air thickened as security officers rushed over. Jake knelt beside Max, his flashlight flicking on as he peered underneath the jet bridge. The beam of light cut through the shadows, revealing. His breath hitched. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. And in that moment he knew, this was no ordinary flight. The flashlight beam flickered slightly as Jake steadied his grip, his pulse hammering in his ears. Max's growls deepened, his body tense as if ready to pounce. Jake leaned in closer, angling the light beneath the jet bridge, trying to make sense of what he was looking at. His breath felt heavy, and the seconds stretched endlessly. The space beneath the jet bridge wasn't large, just a narrow gap between the ground and the structure, a place where no one should have been. Yet something or someone was there. A shadowy form curled up tightly, pressed against the metal support beams, barely visible in the dim glow of his flashlight. Jake's stomach clenched. He had seen a lot in his years as a police officer, but there was something deeply unsettling about this. He swallowed hard and reached for his radio again. "Dispatch. This is Officer Reynolds. I have a possible trespasser or concealed individual under the jet bridge at Gate 14. I need immediate assistance." The response crackled in his earpiece. "Copy that. Officer Reynolds. Units are en route. Proceed with caution." Jake exhaled sharply and turned his attention back to Max. The German Shepherd's ears were perked, his nose working overtime as he sniffed the air. But then, suddenly, his barking stopped. His body went still, his gaze locked onto the shadow beneath the bridge. The pilot, who had remained frozen near the entrance, finally spoke up. His voice was eerily calm. "I don't understand. What's going on?" Jake glanced up at him, noting how rigid he stood, his fists clenched at his sides. Something about the man's reaction wasn't quite right. Most people would be alarmed, asking more questions, stepping back. But this guy wasn't moving. Was he scared? Or was it something else? "Sir, I need you to stay right where you are," Jake ordered, his eyes flicking between the pilot and the shadow below. His gut told him there was a connection here, but he wasn't sure how yet. The pilot didn't respond. He just stared. A sudden noise broke the moment, a soft, rustling sound from beneath the bridge. Then, the shadow shifted. Jake's body tensed as he watched the figure move ever so slightly. A pair of hands came into view, small, trembling, pressing against the ground as if the person was trying to push themselves up but didn't have the strength. Max whined, stepping forward but keeping his body low, his instincts sharp. Jake didn't hesitate. "Come out slowly," he commanded, his voice steady but firm. For a moment, there was no response. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen but undeniably real. Then, at last, the figure moved again, crawling out inch by inch, revealing a frail-looking young woman, her clothes dirted, her hair matted against her face. Her eyes, wide and fearful, darted around as if expecting danger from all sides. Jake felt his breath hitch. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. She collapsed onto her side, chest rising and falling rapidly. It was clear she was exhausted, possibly dehydrated. Whatever had happened to her, it hadn't been good. Before he could say anything, the pilot took a sharp step forward. She doesn't belong here," he blurted out, his voice cracking slightly. "She's probably a runaway." Jake's instincts screamed at him. There was something off about the way the man had said that. Too quick, too dismissive, like he wanted to erase the situation before it even unfolded. Jake crouched next to the woman, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "Miss, can you tell me your name?" The woman flinched, her gaze flickering toward the pilot before locking onto Jake. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, with a shaky breath, she whispered, "Help me." Jake's jaw tightened. Max nudged her gently with his nose, his body language protective. Jake turned to the pilot, his patience thinning. "Do you know her?" The man hesitated. That split second of silence was enough. Jake rose to his feet. "I'm going to need you to stay right where you are, Captain." The pilot's face twitched, a bead of sweat forming near his temple despite the cool air inside the terminal. "You don't understand," he said quickly. "This is a mistake." Jake took a step closer. "Then help me understand. Who is she?" The woman made a small, strangled sound, shaking her head. She tried to push herself up, but her legs gave out beneath her. Jake reached for his radio again. "I need medics at Gate 14 immediately." The pilot's fingers twitched at his sides, his expression unreadable. Something wasn't adding up. Then, as if on cue, more officers arrived, their presence shifting the tension in the air. One of them, Officer Daniels, approached quickly. "What do we have?" Jake gestured toward the woman. "Found her hiding under the jet bridge. She's weak, scared. She needs medical attention." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "And I think this pilot knows more than he's letting on." Daniels gave the pilot a once-over. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some ID." The pilot clenched his jaw but complied, pulling out his credentials with stiff fingers. Jake turned back to the woman. "It's okay. You're safe now." She opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say more, but before she could, the airport intercom crackled to life overhead, announcing a final boarding call. Jake barely registered it. His focus was locked on the fear in her eyes and the unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. Something told him this was just the beginning. Jake could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The young woman's breathing was uneven, her eyes darting around as if she expected someone to snatch her away at any second. He crouched beside her again, lowering his voice. "You're safe," he said, keeping his tone steady. "No one is going to hurt you. Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated, her lips trembling before she whispered, "Emily." Jake nodded. "Okay, Emily. Do you know how you got here?" Her gaze flickered toward the pilot for a split second, so quick that someone less observant might have missed it. But Jake caught it. And he didn't like what it meant. Before he could ask another question, Officer Daniels called out, flipping through the pilot's ID. "Captain Harris, is it?" The pilot nodded stiffly. Daniels studied the ID a moment longer, then looked up. "I assume you were scheduled to fly this plane?" Harris straightened his posture. "Yes. I was just heading to the cockpit when your dog stopped me." Jake didn't miss how he carefully avoided mentioning Emily. "Right," Daniel said, exchanging a glance with Jake. "And you've never seen this young woman before?" The pilot hesitated, but just for a fraction of a second. "No," he said quickly. "Like I said, she must be a runaway." Emily flinched at the word, her arms wrapping around herself. Jake felt his jaw tighten. "Emily, is that true? Did you run away from somewhere?" She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the fabric of her sleeves. "No," she said softly. Then firmer, "I wasn't running away. I was hiding." A cold sensation settled in Jake's stomach. Daniel's expression darkened slightly. "Hiding from what?" Emily's mouth opened, but then she shook her head. "I don't know," she mumbled. "I just knew I couldn't let that plane take off." Jake's eyes snapped toward the jet bridge. His gut had been screaming at him all night, but now it was deafening. Something was wrong, very wrong. Max, still on alert, let out a low whimper, his ears twitching as if he was sensing something deeper than any of them. Daniels caught the shift in energy too. He turned back to the pilot. "Captain Harris, where exactly was this flight headed?" Harris pressed his lips together, clearly unhappy with the questioning. "A direct route to New York," he said. "A standard domestic flight." Jake exchanged a glance with Daniels. Something about this didn't feel standard at all. Emily sucked in a shaky breath. "I heard them talking," she whispered suddenly. Jake leaned in closer. "Who?" Her fingers dug into her arms. I don't know their names. I only heard bits and pieces before I crawled under there. They were talking about the cargo hold. About something being loaded onto the plane." She hesitated, her face paling. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. Jake's spine stiffened. Daniels pulled out his radio. "Control, I need an immediate check on the cargo manifest for Flight 292 to New York. Confirm all listed contents." The radio crackled before a voice responded. "Copy that, checking now." The pilot exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're delaying an entire flight over nothing. Whatever that girl thinks she heard, she's confused." Jake studied him carefully. "You seem awfully eager to get in the air, Captain." Harris shot him a sharp look. "Because I have a job to do." Jake didn't back down. "And what about her? If she was hiding under that bridge, she was scared of something. What happened before she got there?" Harris shook his head, exasperated. "I don't know." His voice rose slightly, then he forced himself to calm down. "Look, if you want to check the cargo, fine. But you're going to feel pretty stupid when you find nothing." Jake wasn't so sure. Moments later, the radio crackled again. "Control to Officer Daniels. Cargo manifest shows standard luggage and freight, no irregularities." Daniels frowned. "Copy that. Any last-minute additions?" A pause. Then, "Negative. Everything accounted for." Jake's mind raced. If Emily had heard something about the cargo hold, but there was no record of anything suspicious, that meant one thing: whatever was there wasn't on the books. His gut twisted. "Sir, we need access to the cargo hold," Daniel said firmly. Harris exhaled, his hands balling into fists. "Fine. But when you find nothing, I expect an apology." Jake didn't respond. He had a bad feeling there wouldn't be anything to apologize for. As officers moved toward the plane, Emily suddenly reached for Jake's sleeve, gripping it weakly. "You have to hurry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They said," she swallowed hard. "They said if the plane took off, no one would ever find it." Jake's blood ran cold. He turned sharply to Daniels. "We need to stop that plane now." Jake didn't waste another second. He grabbed his radio, his voice sharp and urgent. "All units, hold Flight 292 immediately. No one boards, no takeoff clearance until further notice." The air around them shifted. Airport security officers, now fully aware that something serious was unfolding, moved swiftly toward the plane. The tension in the terminal thickened, a quiet but undeniable wave of unease rippling through the passengers still waiting in nearby seating areas. Some had started whispering, others glancing toward the jet bridge with nervous curiosity. Max stayed close to Jake's side, his ears twitching as he picked up on the mounting anxiety in the room. Emily, still gripping Jake's sleeve weakly, looked up at him, her breathing uneven. "They know," she whispered. "They know you're onto them." Jake didn't have time to ask who they were before a sudden movement caught his attention. Just past the security checkpoint, near a set of unmarked doors leading to restricted airport areas, two men in maintenance uniforms turned and hurried in the opposite direction, away from the plane. Jake's instincts flared. "Daniels," he called. His partner followed his line of sight, immediately locking onto the fleeing figures. "Go," Daniels said, already reaching for his radio. "I'll handle things here." Jake didn't hesitate. He gave Max a sharp command, and the German shepherd lunged forward, his powerful stride carrying him toward the two men. Jake was right behind him, weaving through startled passengers, his heart hammering. One of the men glanced back, saw them coming, and cursed under his breath. He nudged his partner and took off in a full sprint. That was all Jake needed. "Max, get him!" The German shepherd leaped into action, covering the distance in seconds. The first man barely had time to react before Max lunged, grabbing hold of his arm and taking him down with practiced precision. The second man skidded to a halt, glancing between his fallen partner and Jake, who was now closing in fast. Panic flashed across his face before he bolted again, disappearing through a side exit. Jake shoved the first man onto his stomach, securing his wrists. "Who are you?" he demanded, but the man just clenched his jaw, refusing to speak. Daniel's voice crackled over Jake's radio. "We've got a problem." Jake exhaled, already knowing whatever Daniels was about to say wouldn't be good. "Go." "The cargo hold. There's an unregistered compartment. It was welded shut, but we forced it open." A beat of silence. Then, "Jake, it's not luggage in there." Jake's grip on the suspect tightened. His pulse pounded as he exchanged a glance with Max, who stood over the subdued man, ears still alert. "What is it?" Jake asked, his voice low. Daniels hesitated, then finally answered. "It's people." For a moment, the world around Jake seemed to still. The distant sounds of airport chatter, the overhead flight announcements, it all faded. He closed his eyes briefly, jaw tightening as the full weight of the situation settled in his chest. Human trafficking. The thought made his blood run cold. He forced himself to move, grabbing his radio again. "Secure that hold and call in backup. No one leaves this airport." Daniels was already ahead of him. "Copy that." The man on the ground struggled slightly under Jake's grip, his face pressing into the cool tile of the terminal floor. "You don't know what you're messing with," he muttered. Jake's fingers twitched, but he kept his voice controlled. "Yeah, try me." The man didn't respond. Jake exhaled sharply and turned back toward the jet bridge, his mind racing. Emily had been right. She had overheard something she wasn't supposed to, something that had put her life in danger. And the pilot, Captain Harris, hadn't just been acting suspicious. He had been complicit. Jake glanced toward the plane, where Harris still stood, his face carefully composed but his fingers twitching at his sides. He had to know it was over. But Jake also knew desperate men did desperate things. And right now, he wasn't sure how far Harris, or the people behind him, were willing to go. Jake's grip on his radio tightened as he watched Captain Harris shift uneasily near the jet bridge. The tension in the air was thick, pressing against him like an unseen force. His gut told him something was still off, something bigger than what they had already uncovered. Just as he was about to move toward Harris, a sharp voice came over his earpiece. It was Daniels again, but this time, his tone carried something different. Not just urgency, fear. "Jake," Daniels said, his breath uneven. "There's a problem. A big one." Jake didn't like the sound of that. He stepped away from the subdued suspect on the floor, his pulse picking up. "Talk to me." Daniels' hesitation sent a chill down his spine. "We checked the hold again," he finally said. "We were expecting more passengers, more victims. But it's not just that, Jake." A pause. "There's cargo in there. Unmarked cases, heavy. And one of them is ticking." Jake's stomach lurched. "Tell me you're joking." "I wish I was," Daniels muttered. "I don't know what's inside yet, but if it's what I think it is." Jake didn't need him to finish the sentence. His mind was already racing, connecting the pieces. The urgency behind the flight, the way the pilot had reacted, the attempt to smuggle people. None of it made sense until now. This wasn't just human trafficking. It was something else. Something far worse. His eyes snapped back to Harris, whose expression had changed. The nervous fidgeting was gone, replaced by something else. Calculation. Jake's instincts screamed at him. Harris wasn't just an accomplice. He was still a threat. Before Jake could react, Harris moved. In one swift motion, the pilot turned and bolted back toward the cockpit. "Stop him!" Jake shouted, already running. Passengers gasped as he shoved through the terminal, dodging stunned onlookers. Max, sensing the shift, lunged forward, sprinting ahead of him. But Harris had a head start. Jake hit his radio again. "Daniels, shut the plane down. Now." "We're trying," Daniels responded, his voice strained. "But..." "Static." Jake cursed under his breath. Daniels' radio had cut off. That wasn't a good sign. He pushed harder, his breath coming fast. Harris was already through the jet bridge, disappearing into the cockpit. If he locked himself inside, stopping him would be a nightmare. Jake wasn't about to let that happen. He reached the entrance just as the door to the cockpit slammed shut. Max skidded to a stop beside him, barking furiously. "Harris!" Jake pounded against the metal door. "Open it now." No response. Jake turned, eyes scanning for anything, any way to break through. The co-pilot seat was empty, meaning Harris was alone in there. But that didn't make him any less dangerous. Jake pressed his ear to the door, straining to hear. A rustling noise. Then a sharp beep. His stomach twisted. Whatever Harris was doing, they were running out of time to stop him. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears as he pressed against the cockpit door, straining to hear what was happening inside. Max barked furiously, his body tense, ready to act. The sharp beeping from inside sent every nerve in Jake's body on high alert. Harris was doing something that couldn't be good. Jake didn't have time to wait. He turned to the flight attendant, who stood frozen near the jet bridge. "Do you have the override code for this door?" he asked, his voice sharp but controlled. She hesitated, glancing between Jake and the door, before nodding quickly. Yes, but only security is supposed to use it." "I am security," Jake said firmly. "Now give it to me." With shaking hands, she punched in the code on the keypad beside the door. The lock gave a soft click. Jake didn't wait. He shoved the door open and burst into the cockpit. Harris was hunched over the controls, his fingers flying over the switches. Jake's eyes immediately darted to the panel, and the small black device attached to it, blinking rapidly. A timer. And it was counting down. Harris turned sharply, his face twisted in frustration. "You don't understand," he snapped. "You should have let me take off." Jake didn't bother with questions. He lunged. Harris barely had time to react before Jake tackled him, shoving him against the control panel. The two struggled, hands grasping for control, knocking switches and dials out of place. Harris fought hard, but Jake was stronger. He forced the pilot's arms behind his back, pinning him against the seat. "Max!" Jake called out. The German Shepherd leaped in, snapping his jaws just inches from Harris's face, making sure he didn't move an inch. Breathing heavily, Jake reached for his radio. "Daniels, I need bomb squad now. We've got a live device in the cockpit." The response was immediate. "We're already moving. How much time is left?" Jake glanced at the blinking numbers. Less than 2 minutes. His chest tightened. "Not enough," he muttered. Harris let out a bitter laugh. "You can't stop it," he said through clenched teeth. "That plane wasn't just carrying people. You have no idea who really wanted this flight to take off." Jake ignored him. His focus was on the device. If it was wired to the controls, tampering with it could trigger an early detonation. But if he did nothing, the consequences would be just as bad. Daniel's voice crackled over the radio again. "Evacuating the area now. Can you disable it?" Jake's jaw tightened. "I don't know yet." His fingers hovered over the wires. There were 3, red, blue, and black. Standard setup, but this wasn't a movie. If he picked wrong, there wouldn't be a second chance. His mind raced. He'd handled explosives before, but not like this. Not wired into a cockpit panel mid-operation. Then he saw it. The faintest flicker in the wiring. A tiny pulse of power running through the red wire. That was the trigger. The fail-safe. If it was cut first, the whole thing would go off. Jake exhaled slowly. "Blue first," he muttered to himself. He grabbed a small knife from his belt and, with steady hands, sliced through the blue wire. The timer hesitated, then kept counting down. Jake swallowed hard. 30 seconds. "Jake, talk to me." Daniel's voice pushed through the static. "Almost there," Jake said, trying to steady his breathing. He moved to the black wire. It controlled the power to the detonator. If he was right, cutting it would disable the device entirely. If he was wrong, he didn't have time to think. With a swift motion, he severed the black wire. The timer stopped. For a moment, Jake didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, slowly, he let out a breath. "It's done," he said into the radio. "Device is disarmed." A wave of static crackled in his ear before Daniels responded. "Holy Jake, you good?" Jake glanced at Harris, who was now slumped in his seat, his face pale with defeat. Max still stood guard, growling low in his throat. "Yeah," Jake muttered. "We're good." As the weight of the situation settled, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air outside. The bomb squad, federal agents, backup had arrived. But just as Jake turned to leave the cockpit, Harris let out a quiet chuckle. Jake narrowed his eyes. "What's so funny?" Harris looked up at him, something dark flickering behind his tired eyes. "You stopped this one," he said. "But you have no idea how many others are still out there." Jake's stomach dropped, because for the first time that night, he realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Jake stared at Harris, the pilot's last words echoing in his mind. His pulse was still racing, his body tense, but the immediate danger had passed. The bomb was disarmed. The plane was secure. The trafficked passengers in the cargo hold would get help. But that last warning, that wasn't something he could shake. Daniels and a team of officers rushed onto the plane, their weapons drawn, scanning the scene. When Daniels locked eyes with Jake, a silent exchange passed between them, relief, exhaustion, but also the weight of what had just happened. "Get him out of here," Jake muttered, jerking his chin toward Harris. Daniels nodded, stepping forward to grab the pilot by the arm. Harris didn't resist. Whatever fight he had left was gone. His career, his plan, everything had crumbled right in front of him. As the officers led Harris off the plane, Jake ran a hand down his face. His mind was still racing, replaying every moment, every choice. The trafficked victims. Who were they? Where were they supposed to go? And who had arranged for them to be hidden on that flight? Jake turned back toward the cargo hold, where paramedics were already tending to the shaken passengers who had been trapped inside. He spotted Emily standing near the door, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes tired but alert. When she saw Jake, she managed a small, weary smile. "You really don't give up, do you?" Jake let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Not when something doesn't add up." She glanced toward the officers escorting Harris down the jet bridge. "He wasn't the one in charge, was he?" Jake followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "No," he admitted. "Someone higher up made this happen. Harris was just a piece of the puzzle." Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Will they find them?" Jake hesitated before answering. "We'll make sure of it." She nodded, but he could see the lingering worry in her eyes. A few feet away, Max sat calmly, his job done for now. Jake reached down, giving the German shepherd a firm pat on the side. "Good work, partner." Max wagged his tail slightly, his sharp eyes still scanning the room. As the hours passed, the airport slowly returned to normal. The passengers who had been waiting for Flight 292 were informed that their trip had been cancelled, though none of them truly knew why. Authorities worked quietly behind the scenes, removing evidence, securing statements, and beginning the long process of unraveling the larger operation at play. Jake stood near the edge of the scene, watching as agents loaded Harris into a vehicle. The pilot didn't look back. He knew he was done. Daniels walked up beside Jake, letting out a low breath. "It's never just one guy," he muttered. Jake nodded. "No. But this was a start." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the night settling on them. Then Daniels turned toward him with a smirk. "You sure know how to pick your fights." Jake scoffed. "I don't pick them. They just seem to find me." Daniels chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, next time, let's try to keep the stakes a little lower, huh?" Jake glanced toward the plane one last time before turning away. No promises. As he walked out of the terminal, Max trotting beside him, he knew this case was far from over. The traffickers behind the scenes, the ones Harris had hinted at, they were still out there. But now, they knew someone was coming for them. And Jake had no intention of stopping until he found them all.